She drank a potion to steal his secrets in the dark. He asked a stranger to wear the face of the one woman he could never have. He never guessed she was already wearing it. Where lies feel warmer than truth, our story begins in this very moment. The potion tasted of iron and crushed violets, and it changed her from the inside out. Hermione had swallowed stranger things in the line of duty: polyjuice with its mud-thick sediment, truth serums that left her tongue loose for hours. But nothing had ever felt like this. This did not simply rearrange her face. It reached down through her and pulled, the way a tide pulls sand from beneath bare feet, until the woman standing before the tall gilt mirror was someone she had never been and could not quite disown. The glass held a stranger with hair the colour of dark honey, loosed in deliberate disorder over one bare shoulder. The mouth was fuller. The eyes were her own. That had not changed, could not, the brewer had warned her. But they had been set into a softer face, and softness looked like a lie there. "They call this one Ivory," the woman beside her said. Marguerite. The contact the ministry had bought at a price Hermione preferred not to think about. She moved through the dressing chamber with the ease of someone who had learned long ago how to be beautiful without being present. "You'll answer to it. You'll answer to nothing else. Forget the other name until you're out the front doors again." Hermione's fingers found the edge of the dressing table and pressed until the wood bit back. "And if he recognizes me?" "He won't." Marguerite lifted a strand of the honey-dark hair and let it fall, appraising. "That's what you're paying for. The brew rewrites more than skin. Your walk, the pitch of you, the way you hold a glass. He could stand a hand's breadth away and search your face for an hour and find only ivory looking back." A pause, cool as the marble underfoot. "Provided you don't do something foolish, like flinch." "I don't flinch," Hermione thought, and her hand betrayed her by moving to the sleeve that wasn't there, to smooth a cuff that this dress did not have. She caught the gesture halfway and let the fingers curl closed instead. The club had no name that any respectable ledger would record. Those who belonged called it simply the House. In the lowered register, men used for church and for secrets. It sat in a fold of London that the maps declined to acknowledge, reachable only by a certain door in a certain wall, and only by those whose blood ran the right, cold, ancient way. Purebloods, the last of the old lines, gathering in the dark to be waited upon, to be flattered, to be unmade in privacy by women trained to make unmaking feel like tenderness. She had read the file until the ink of it lived behind her eyes. Galleons moving in silence between the oldest families. Names she recognized from her school days, older now, sunk deeper into whatever they'd become. And one name that had made the parchment feel warmer in her hands than parchment had any right to feel. Malfoy, Draco, irregular, discreet even by the standards of a place built on discretion. Something moved through this house on the nights he came, and the ministry wanted to know what. What he carried, what he confessed, what a man like that came to the dark to say when he believed no one who mattered would ever hear it. "So I will be no one who matters," Hermione thought. "I will be Ivory, and he will hand me his secrets the way these men hand over their coats." It had sounded clean in the briefing room, under the honest glare of ministry lamps. It did not sound clean here. Here the air was thick with a green-tinged firelight that clung to the skin like warm water. The corridors ran long and hushed, hung with tapestries so old their threads had gone the brown of dried tobacco, and every so often a door stood open on a room where someone laughed too softly or did not laugh at all. The whole place breathed a scent she could not name at first, and then could. Beeswax and cold stone, and something floral turned faintly to rot. The smell of flowers kept too long in a sealed room. It got into the back of her throat and stayed there. She was to wait in the third chamber down the eastern hall, Ivory's room. It had been someone's before it was hers for the night, a real someone, a woman who had stepped aside for a fee and a promise of silence, and it wore that history in small, mortifying ways. A hairpin on the sill, the ghost of perfume in the cushions. A single long thread of that honey-dark hair caught in the hinge of the wardrobe, as though the room itself could not decide which of them it belonged to now. Hermione sat on the edge of the low couch and made herself breathe. Show him nothing. Take everything. Walk out the way you came in, with what they sent you for, and never think of this room again. The plan was good. She had built it herself, brick by brick, in the clean hours before the potion. The trouble was that plans were built in daylight by the version of a person who had never yet had to live inside them. And now the daylight version of Hermione Granger was very far away, and the woman left holding the plan was sitting half-dressed in a stranger's perfume, waiting to lie to a man she had spent a decade trying not to think about. She thought of him anyway. She had been thinking of him for 3 days, ever since his name surfaced in the file, and she had told herself it was strategy. Know your subject. Anticipate him. But the memories that came were not strategic. They were small and old and sharp-edged. A boy's white face across a courtroom, drained of every cruel thing it had once held so easily. A hand that had not risen to name her when naming her would have been so simple. A voice, years later, at some ministry function neither of them had wanted to attend, saying Granger, just her name, nothing after it, as if the name were a sentence he could not finish and had decided to abandon. She had thought about that unfinished sentence more than she would ever admit. The knuckles of her folded hands had gone pale. She turned them over, studied them, made herself unclench. Ivory does not clench her hands. Ivory is water. Ivory bends. Somewhere in the house, a clock she could not see began to tell the hour. Low bronze notes falling one after another into the hush, and she counted them without meaning to. 9, 10, 11. And on the last of them, the corridor outside her door filled with the sound of footfalls. Not hurried. That was the first thing she knew about him, before she knew anything else. Whoever walked toward Ivory's room walked the way a man walks, who has nowhere he would rather be, and no wish at all to arrive. Slow, even, each step set down as if it cost him something. Her whole body went still in the way of a hare in long grass. This is the moment. If he knows you now, before you've said a word, from the shape of you sitting in the light. The steps stopped. The handle turned with a small metallic protest, the bite of old brass, and the door swung inward on its silence, and the green firelight leaned toward the opening as though it, too, wanted to see who had come. He stood on the threshold with the dark of the corridor behind him, and for one endless breath, he did not move at all. He was taller than her memory had kept him, and thinner through the face, the boyish softness long since burned away to leave the architecture beneath. The pale sweep of brow, the jaw held a fraction too tight, the grey eyes that had always looked at the world as if it had personally disappointed them. He wore black, well-cut, expensive in the quiet way that never announced itself. A silver ring caught the firelight on his right hand, and his gaze moved over her, over Ivory, over the honey-dark hair and the softened mouth, and the bare shoulder turned toward the flames, with the flat, exhausted attention of a man who had done this before and expected nothing new from it. Nothing in that gaze snagged, nothing caught. He looked at her and found only the stranger she had been made into, and his eyes moved on, uninterested, to the fire. It should have been relief. She had planned for exactly this, paid for exactly this, and it arrived precisely on schedule. The disguise held. He did not know her. The mission was, in its first and most dangerous particular, already a success. So she did not understand the thing that happened in her chest when he failed to see her. The small, cold drop of it, like a coin falling into a well too deep to hear it land. He closed the door behind him. The latch met the frame with a soft, final click that sealed the two of them into the green-lit hush together, and the last of the corridor's dark was gone, and there was only the fire and the old flower scent and the space of a few feet of worn carpet between the woman who was not Ivory and the man who did not know her. "You're new," Draco Malfoy said. His voice had gone lower with the years, roughened somewhere underneath. He did not make it a question, and he did not look at her as he said it. He was pulling off the silver ring, turning it in his fingers, watching the firelight run along its edge. They keep changing the faces. Hermione opened her mouth, and for a terrible instant nothing came, because the woman inside her wanted to say, "It's me," wanted it with a violence that frightened her. And then Ivory's voice rose up in her throat instead, low and unhurried, a voice she had practiced in the mirror until it stopped sounding like a betrayal. "And do you mind the changing?" she asked. He looked up then. For the first time his eyes settled on her and stayed, and something behind them sharpened. Not recognition, nothing so dangerous as that, but a flicker of surprise, as if the fire had shifted and shown him a different room than the one he'd walked into. "No," he said slowly. "No, I don't suppose I do." And he crossed the worn carpet and lowered himself into the chair across from her, close enough now that she could see the fatigue banked in his face and the silver ring turning in his restless hand. And he settled his grey gaze on the stranger who was watching him with her own hidden eyes, and he said the words the house had taught them all to expect. "Well then, tell me what it is I've come here to want." The question hung between them, like smoke that would not clear. "Tell me what it is I've come here to want." It was the ritual, of course. Marguerite had rehearsed her in it that afternoon, reciting the words in a flat clerk's murmur that stripped them of everything. The client speaks, and the companion answers, and in the answering she offers him a mirror in which he can see the shape of his own hunger without ever having to name it aloud. That was the trade. Not the touching, Marguerite had said, though there was that for those who wanted it. The real commerce of the house was permission, the permission to want something and have it received without judgment, without record, without the long, cold aftertaste of having been known. So, Hermione understood the mechanics of the moment. What she had not understood, until she was inside it, was how much the question would cost her to answer. Because he was watching her now with those tired grey eyes, and the fire threw its green-gold light across the sharp planes of his face, and she was meant to look at Draco Malfoy and tell him his own secret desire back to him, and every instinct she had ever trusted told her she was about to get it catastrophically wrong. He is a subject, she reminded herself. Read him. That is all this is. Read him the way you'd read a hostile witness, the way you'd read a cursed manuscript. For the tell, for the crack, for the place where the truth leaks through. She let her gaze move over him with a slowness she did not feel. The expensive black. The ring, gone still now in his fingers. The way he sat, not sprawled, not at ease, but upright at the very edge of the chair, as though some part of him were always half risen to leave a room he had only just entered. His shoulders carried a tension that the drink and the dark and the green firelight had not touched. Whatever he had come here to be unmade of, he had brought all of it in with him, intact. "You didn't come to be flattered," she said at last. Her voice, Ivory's voice, low and certain, surprised her by its steadiness. Men who want flattery are easy to read. They lean in. They fill the silences. You sit like a man who's already been told everything good about himself by people who wanted something and learned not to believe a word of it. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The memory of where a smile might once have gone. "Go on," he said. "You didn't come to be touched." She watched his hands as she said it, and saw them tighten fractionally on the arms of the chair, and knew she'd struck near something. Or you did. But that's not the first thing. The touch is the price of admission, not the thing itself. You'd pay it to get to the other thing. She tilted her head, and the honey-dark hair slid against her bare shoulder, and she saw him track the movement, and then deliberately not track it. You came to stop performing. For 1 hour, in one room, where no one knows your name, and no one will carry the story out. The fire cracked and settled. Somewhere far off in the house, a woman laughed, and the sound came thin and muffled through the old stone, and then was gone. Draco Malfoy looked at her for a long moment, and she could not read what moved behind his eyes, and the not knowing was its own kind of vertigo. "Everyone in this house says some version of that," he said finally. His voice had gone quiet and flat, and it was worse than anger would have been. "You're cleverer about it than most, but it's still the script. No one will judge you here. Take off the mask. Be your true self." He turned the ring over once, and the silver caught the light, and he set it down on the small table between them with a click that was very loud in the hush. "I've been coming here long enough to know that the promise of being unknown is just another thing they sell. The mask doesn't come off in a place like this. It only gets thicker. Everyone's pretending. You're pretending to want to hear it. I'm pretending it helps to say it. That's the whole arrangement." The words landed in her like cold water, because they were true, and because they were more true than he could possibly know. She was pretending. She was pretending with a completeness he could not begin to imagine. Pretending in her skin, in her voice, in the very bones of her face. And here he sat, mistaking her one enormous lie for the small professional lies of every other woman who had ever waited for him in this room. He's right, she thought, and the thought had a sick weight to it. He's more right than anyone in this building, and he's saying it to the one person who's proving him right with every breath. And underneath that, sharp and unwelcome, came another thought entirely. He's lonely. Not the theatrical loneliness of a man who wants to be coaxed out of it. The bone-deep, structural loneliness of a man who has decided that being known is a door that closed for him a long time ago, and who has built an entire life around the closing of it. She had come here to find a secret. She was beginning to be afraid that the secret was simply this. That Draco Malfoy no longer believed anyone would ever tell him the truth, and had stopped, long ago, expecting to hear it. Then why come at all? She asked. The question left her before she had decided to ask it, and it came out in a register that was not quite Ivory's. Too honest, too plain, the professional gloss cracking for just an instant to show something rawer underneath. She saw him catch it. She saw his eyes narrow the smallest fraction, not with suspicion, but with a kind of startled attention, the way a man turns toward an unexpected sound. "Why come?" he repeated, "if I don't believe it works?" Yes. He was quiet for so long that she thought he would not answer. The green firelight had lowered as the logs settled to embers, and the shadows in the room had grown, pooling in the corners, softening the edges of him, until he was mostly a dark shape and two pale hands, and the faint gleam of light in his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped so low she had to lean toward it. "Because it's the closest I get." He was not looking at her now. He was looking at the fire, or past it, at something the fire stood in for. To the thing, even knowing it's false. A man can be starving and still sit down at a table with a painted meal on it if it's the only table left. The corner of his mouth twisted. That's a pathetic thing to say to a stranger. But you asked, and you're a stranger, so it costs me nothing. It costs me everything, Hermione did not say. She sat with her hidden eyes fixed on him and felt the whole careful architecture of her mission shift beneath her, the way the ground shifts in the first slow second of subsidence before anything has visibly fallen. She had come to take from him. She had come armored in her own righteousness. He was a Malfoy. He was a subject. Whatever he handed her would be evidence, and evidence was clean. Evidence was the law. Evidence was on the right side. And instead, she was sitting in a stranger's perfume, watching a man confess to a hunger she recognized, because she had it too, because she had spent her own decade being known only for her mind and her usefulness, and never once for the plain fact of being a person alone in a body that wanted, sometimes, simply to be seen. Stop, she told herself. This is not sympathy. This is the potion. This is the room. This is a man who has had years of practice making his emptiness sound like poetry to women he's paying to listen. But she did not quite believe herself, and the not believing frightened her more than anything had all night. You said I'm cleverer than most, she said, and steadied her voice back into Ivory's low certainty by main force. So, let me be clever then. You didn't come here to take off a mask you don't believe comes off. You came here to be given a different one, Something you can wear for an hour that isn't the one you wear everywhere else. She let the pause stretch. So, tell me, what face would you like to put on tonight? It was the right thing to say. It was the professional thing, the thing that returned them both to the safe ground of the arrangement, the thing that turned the raw moment back into a transaction. She saw him receive it, saw some door quietly close behind his eyes, and told herself the tightening in her chest was relief. He picked up the silver ring again, turned it. The firelight, gone red now, ran along its edge. "You want to know what I'd choose," he said slowly. And there was something new threading through the fatigue in his voice. Something careful, something that had been kept a long time in a locked place and was being brought out now into the dim red light with a slowness that suggested he had never once let it into the open before. "If I could ask for anything, any face, any woman in the world sitting in that chair where you're sitting now." "Anyone," she agreed, and did not know why her own pulse had begun to climb. He looked at her then, full on, direct, the tired grey eyes holding hers, and for one vertiginous instant she was certain he saw straight through the honey-dark hair and the softened mouth to the woman hiding inside them, certain the whole edifice had come down, certain he knew. But no, it was not recognition in his face. It was resolve. The look of a man stepping off an edge on purpose, because the fall was preferable to standing one more moment at the top. "Next time," Draco Malfoy said very quietly, "I want you to come to me as Hermione Granger." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into a still black pool, and everything went silent around it. The fire, the far-off laughter, the breath in her own throat. And Hermione sat frozen in a stranger's skin, hearing her own name in his mouth for the first time in years, spoken not as an insult and not as a sentence he could not finish, but as a wish, low and naked and terribly, unbearably sincere, while the last red light of the fire guttered down between them, and neither of them moved at all. She did not remember leaving the room. There was the name in his mouth, and then there was the cold of the street outside the door that the maps refused to hold, and the space between the two had been erased as cleanly as if someone had taken a blade to the film of her memory and cut the frames away. She stood in a fold of London that did not exist, in the thin, small hours, with the potion still bleeding out of her. She could feel it going, the honey-dark hair coarsening back to her own, the borrowed softness draining out of her face, the way warmth drains from a stone the sun has left. And she pressed her spine to the wet brick and shook and told herself it was only the cold. It was not the cold. "Next time, I want you to come to me as Hermione Granger." She got herself home somehow. The apparition was rough, ungoverned, and she landed hard in her own dark flat and stood swaying in the middle of it with her coat still on. Her real face returned to her now, her real hair a wild dark weight down her back, her own plain, unremarkable hands lifting to her own mouth as though she could hold the name inside if she covered the place it had entered. Why? That was the thing that would not let her sleep, that first night, and the ones that came after. Not how had he known, because he had not known. That was the whole horror of it. He had asked for Hermione Granger while looking straight at a stranger, which meant the wish had nothing to do with the woman in front of him and everything to do with the woman who lived, apparently. apparently, somewhere behind his eyes, in whatever locked room he had kept her all these years. Why her? She turned it in the dark the way he had turned that silver ring. A man could ask for anything in a place like that. Any face the potion could build. Beautiful strangers, dead lovers, women out of paintings and out of dreams. She had read enough of the file to know the kinds of things men came to the house to want, and none of them, not one, had ever been the Muggle-born who bested you at school and testified at your father's trial, and has spent a decade being nothing to you at all. Except she had not been nothing. That was the impossible arithmetic of it. To be asked for like that, in the dark, in secret, by a man who believed he was speaking to no one who mattered. You did not ask for nothing. You asked for the thing you could not have and could not stop wanting. You asked for the ache you had learned to live around. He aches for me, she thought, lying rigid in her own bed, with the grey dawn coming up cold behind the curtains. And the thought was so enormous and so forbidden that her mind simply slid off the surface of it, again and again, unable to find purchase. She did not tell the ministry. That was the first crack, and she felt it open in her the moment she sat down to write the report. The clean official parchment, the honest lamp, the tidy columns for subject conduct and disclosures obtained, and her quill hovering over them, and the truth of what had happened in that green-lit room sitting in her chest like a swallowed coal. Subject expressed desire for companion to assume the identity of H.G. She could not write it. To write it was to hand him over, his one unguarded wish, the softest and most defenseless thing he owned, filed and stamped and read aloud in some briefing room by men who would laugh, or worse, who would use it. She had gone into that house to take his secrets, and she had found one, and she discovered now that she would sooner cut off her own hand than surrender it. So she wrote no material disclosures and recommend continued surveillance, and sat looking at the lie for a long time before she signed it. And when she signed it, the ink went down crooked, and she did not correct it. The days that followed were their own slow torment. She went to the ministry. She did her work. She sat in meetings where Draco Malfoy's name surfaced among a dozen others. The money, always the money. The quiet galleons moving between the old families, the thing the investigation had actually been built to chase. And she nodded and took her notes and felt like a woman walking a corridor whose floor had been replaced, sometime in the night, with black water skinned over to look like stone, because the investigation had not changed. The suspicion that had sent her into the house had not evaporated because the man behind it had turned out to have a wound where she'd expected a weapon. There was still something moving in the dark on the nights he came. There was still a reason the ministry wanted eyes on him. And she had gone and made herself the eyes. And now the eyes had a stake. And a stake was the one thing an investigator was never, ever permitted to have. I should hand it off, she thought, 12 times a day. I should tell them I've been compromised. I should give the file to someone whose pulse doesn't climb when they read his name. She did not do that either. And she knew, with the ruthless clarity she had always been able to turn on everyone but herself, exactly what her refusal meant. It meant she was going back. It had had meant it from the moment she stood shaking against the wet brick with his voice still in her ears. Every hour of pretending otherwise was just the long, slow business of admitting it. The only question that remained was the one that mattered, and it was not a question about the mission at all. He had asked her to come as Hermione Granger. He had asked the potion to build a copy, a mask, another mask, the very thing he'd said he no longer believed in, a false Hermione to sit in the chair and let him say to her the things he could never say to the true one. That was the wish. That was what the house sold, and what he had bought. Not her, but a safe and knowing counterfeit of her. A Hermione who could be dismissed at dawn and dissolved by morning, and never carry a single word of it back into the daylight where it might cost him something. She could give him that. It would be the simplest thing in the world. Drink the potion, let it build the copy. Walk into that room wearing a face that was almost her own but wasn't, and harvest every honest word the counterfeit shook loose from him. It would be perfect tradecraft. It would be exactly what she had come to do. And it would be, she understood, standing at her cold window with the grey city going about its business below her, a kind of cowardice so complete that she was not sure she would survive committing it. Because here was the thing she could not make herself unthink once she had thought it. He did not want the copy. He thought he did. He had asked for it because asking for the real thing was impossible. Because the real Hermione Granger was a woman who had watched his father tried, and who had never in her life looked at him with anything softer than wariness. And you did not ask a woman like that to sit in the dark and receive your unguarded heart. So he had asked for a version of her that was safe to want. He had made her into a mask, because the alternative, wanting the true woman, the whole woman, the one who could refuse him and mean it, was more than he could bear to reach for. But she was the true woman. She was standing right here, holding his wish in her two plain hands, and she had a choice that no potion and no mask could make for her. She could give him the counterfeit and stay safe behind it. Or she could go to him as herself, her own face, her own hair, her own eyes that had always been her own and could not be disguised, and let him say his forbidden things to the real thing, and let the real thing hear them and bear the weight of hearing them and be changed. He would never know. That was the vertiginous heart of it. He had asked for a copy. If she came with her own true face, he would see only the copy he had ordered, a Hermione so perfect he would never dream she was the woman herself. The disguise would be no disguise at all. She would deceive him more completely than any potion could, by the simple, impossible trick of being exactly who she was. That's monstrous, she thought. That's the cruelest thing I could do to him, to let him bear himself to me believing I'm a phantom, and to stand there in my own skin and take it. And underneath the horror, quiet and terrible and undeniable, the other thing. And it's the only way he'll ever say it to the real me. The only way I'll ever hear it. If I come as the copy, he's speaking to a ghost. If I come as myself, then whatever he says, however he believes he's saying it, he'll be saying it to me, to the actual me, and I'll be the one standing there when he does. She did not sleep that night either. She sat up in the dark with the decision already made, and only her conscience still arguing, a losing rearguard action against a thing that had been settled somewhere below the reach of argument. In the small hours, she rose and went to the drawer where she had put the vial Marguerite had given her. The second dose, the return dose, meant to build ivory again, or to build whatever face she named. She held it up to the faint light from the window and watched the potion move inside the glass, dark and slow, the colour of old wine. She would not drink it. She turned the vial in her fingers the way he had turned the ring, and understood that the most dangerous lie she would ever tell would require no potion at all, only her own unaltered face, walked into a green-lit room, offered to a man who had asked for a copy, and would receive, without ever knowing it, the whole devastating truth. She thought of his voice saying her name like a wish he had never expected to speak aloud. She thought of the fatigue in him and the loneliness that had stopped performing itself, and the painted meal at the only table left. And she closed her hand around the vial until the glass warmed against her palm, and she made herself a promise she was not at all sure she had the right to make, that when he next opened that door and looked for the copy of Hermione Granger he had ordered out of the dark, the woman waiting for him in the firelight, in her own skin and her own name and her own unguarded and terrified heart, would already be there. She poured the potion down the drain and watched the old wine dark of it swirl away, and then she stood a long time at the sink with the empty vial in her hand, because emptying it had felt like a sentence handed down, and there was no appeal from it now. The house took her back without a question. Marguerite met her at the hidden door with the same cool appraisal she wore like a second face, and if she noticed that the woman before her wore no borrowed skin tonight, that this was Hermione Granger entire, dark-haired and plain-faced and unaltered, she gave no sign of it beyond a single slow blink, the blink of a woman who had spent a lifetime learning not to ask which of her clients' arrangements were real. He requested a particular face, Marguerite said, low as she led her down the eastern hall. The tapestries breathed their old tobacco dark on either side. You know the one. I know the one. And you've... A pause. The green firelight from an open door slid across Marguerite's cheekbone and away. You've made yourself into it. Yes, Hermione said. And it was not a lie, and it was the largest lie she had ever told, and both of those things were true at once, and she carried them both down the hushed corridor to Ivory's door, to the room that had been Ivory's, that would be, tonight, something else entirely. She did not sit on the couch this time. She could not have borne to be discovered, arranged, posed, waiting like a thing that had been set out. She stood by the fire with her back half to the door, her own dark hair loose down her spine, her own hands clasped before her to keep them from the sleeve cuff gesture that gave her away, and she watched the flames and listened for the footfalls. And when they came, slow even, each step set down as if it cost him something, exactly as before, she closed her eyes for the length of one breath and opened them again and did not turn around. The handle bit. The door swung inward on its silence. The green light leaned toward the opening, and then nothing. No footstep across the carpet, no sound at all. Only the fire and the far-off hush of the house, and behind her, in the doorway, a stillness so complete and so charged that she could feel it against the bare skin of her shoulders, like a change in the pressure of the air before a storm breaks. She turned. He stood on the threshold with the dark behind him, and he was not looking at her the way he had looked at Ivory. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something he has wanted so long and so hopelessly that its actual appearance strikes him not as joy, but as a kind of injury. The grey eyes gone wide and fixed, the tired architecture of his face undone all at once, the careful, upright tension of him arrested mid-motion, one hand still on the door he had not finished opening. The silver ring caught the firelight. His mouth had come open on a word he did not say. "He thinks I'm the copy," she reminded herself, fiercely, because she needed the reminder, because for one plunging instant, the way he looked at her had made her forget that this was a lie and not a homecoming. "He asked the potion to build me, and he thinks it did. He's not seeing me. He's seeing the mask he ordered." But there was no comfort in it, because the mask he had ordered was her face, and the wonder breaking across his own was aimed at her face, and there was no potion between them to catch the wonder and hold it off. It came straight through, straight into her, and lodged. "You came," Draco said. His voice had gone to almost nothing. "You asked me to." He shut the door. His hand shook very slightly on the latch. She saw it, the small betraying tremor quickly stilled, and then he stood with his back to the wood, as though he needed it to hold him up. And he looked at her across the worn carpet with an expression she had never once in her life seen him wear. Every version of Draco Malfoy she carried in her memory was armored. The sneering boy, the white-faced defendant, the careful adult murmuring her name at ministry functions and abandoning the sentence. All of them guarded, all of them held, all of them built to give nothing away. This man was giving everything away and did not know it, because he believed there was no one real in the room to give it to. "They told me the potion couldn't do the eyes," he said. He had not moved from the door. That, whatever face it built, the eyes would be the woman's own underneath. "I told them I didn't care about the eyes." A breath. "I was lying. It's the eyes I wanted most, and they got them right. God help me, they got them exactly right." "Because they're mine," she did not say. "Because there was no potion. Because you're looking at the eyes I was born with, and there's no counterfeit in them at all." She had thought she was prepared for this. She had spent 3 sleepless nights building herself up to it. The deception, the terrible completeness of it, the standing in her own skin while he poured himself out to a phantom. She had thought the hard part would be maintaining it, holding her nerve, keeping Ivory's low certainty in her voice while the real Hermione screamed underneath. She had not understood that the hard part would be the opposite, that the real Hermione would not have to be kept down, because the real Hermione was the only one he was speaking to, and every honest thing he said would land in her without any barrier at all. "Sit," she said, because she had to say something, and because the standing was unbearable. "Please." He crossed to the chair, the same chair across the low table where the ring had clicked down 2 weeks before, and he lowered himself into it slowly, and he did not once take his eyes from her. She sat across from him. The fire threw its green-gold light between them. And for a while neither of them spoke, and the silence was not empty. It was the fullest thing in the room, a held breath, a wire drawn taut and humming between 2 points. And she understood that this was the intimacy the house actually sold. Not the touching, which he did not reach for, but this, the permission to look at the thing you wanted in the open without having to pretend you did not want it. He looked at her as though he were memorizing her against a long famine to come. "I don't know how to do this," he said at last, a rough, low admission. "I asked for you, and now there's a version of you sitting there, and I find I don't know what I meant to say. I've said it to you 1,000 times in my head, and now the words won't." He stopped. His hand had found the silver ring. He turned it. "I thought if I could just have you here, safe, not the real one that couldn't—" He stopped again. "Couldn't what?" Her voice barely carried. "Couldn't look at me the way the real one would," he said. "The real Granger. If she knew, if she was sitting where you're sitting and knew what I—" The ring turned. His jaw was tight. "She'd look at me the way she looked at me in that courtroom, the way she's looked at me every time our paths have crossed in 10 years. Careful, on guard, like I'm a thing that might still bite." He lifted his eyes to hers, and there was something naked and unbearable in them. "You won't look at me like that. That's what I paid for. A version of her that could hear it and not recoil." The word went into her like a splinter, because it was true, because that was exactly how she had looked at him for 10 years, in every corridor and every courtroom and every crowded ministry hall. Careful, on guard, wary. And she had never once thought to wonder what it had cost him to be looked at that way, or whether he had noticed, or whether he had carried it. He had carried it. He had built an entire secret architecture around the carrying of it. And he was describing it now to what he believed was a phantom, in a voice that had gone raw at the edges, and the real woman he was describing was sitting 3 feet away, with her hands clasped white in her lap, hearing herself narrated as the thing he could not survive being seen by. "Tell him," something in her said, wild and sudden. "Tell him it's you. Tell him you didn't come as the copy, you came as yourself. You're the real one, and you're here, and you're not recoiling." But she could not. To tell him now was to reveal not just that she was Hermione, but that she was Hermione who had come to spy. Hermione who worked for the ministry that was hunting him. Hermione who had walked into the softest, defenseless heart of him under the banner of an investigation. The truth she was withholding was not one truth, but 2, braided together, and she could not pull one free without the other, and the second would destroy him. She had built a trap for a Malfoy and fallen into it herself, and now there was no flaw beneath either of them. So she did the only thing left that was not a lie. She unclasped her hands. She reached across the small table, slowly, giving him every chance to draw back, and she laid her fingers over the restless hand that turned the silver ring, over his knuckles, over the cold band of the metal, her own bare skin against his, and she stilled his hand beneath hers. He went rigid. The breath left him in a single, unguarded rush. He stared down at her hand on his as though it were a thing he could not account for, a small, impossible warmth, and his own hand turned slowly beneath it, not to pull away, but to open, palm up, so that her fingers slid into his, and his closed around them, carefully, disbelievingly, the way a man holds something he has been told his whole life he was not permitted to touch. "You're warm," he said, wondering, wrecked. They said you wouldn't. They said the potion runs cold. You're warm. And Hermione Granger sat in the green firelight with her real hand held fast in both of his, her real warmth passing into him, her real eyes fixed on his undone face. And she did not tell him the reason he could feel her warmth was that there had never been any potion at all, that it was her, that it was only her, that it had always been her. And she let him keep believing he was holding a phantom while the truth burned in her throat and his thumb moved slowly, wonderingly over the back of her hand, and neither of them, for a long and trembling while, said anything at all. She went back a third time and a fourth, and after that she stopped counting, because counting would have meant admitting that the visits had become the thing her whole life now arranged itself around, that the daylight hours at the ministry had turned into a long grey corridor. She walked only to reach the green-lit room at the end of it. It was no longer a mission. She knew that the way you know the weather has changed without being able to name the hour it turned. Somewhere between the second visit and the third, the file had stopped being the reason and become the alibi. She still carried it. She still sat in the meetings and took her notes and let them believe their eyes were on Draco Malfoy. But she had not written a true word in her reports since the night he said her name, and every false entry she made, no material disclosures, continued surveillance advised, was another stone laid across the mouth of the thing she was protecting, which was not the ministry's case, and not her own career, but him, the soft, undefended centre of him that she had been sent to pry open, and had, instead, closed her whole body around, like a hand around a flame in the wind. And the secrets came. That was the cruelty of it. She had gone in to harvest them, and now they came unbidden, night after night, and not one of them was the kind the ministry wanted. They were wounds. That was all they had ever been. He told the phantom things he had told no one. He told her, believing her a thing built from a potion, safe, temporary, incapable of carrying anything into the daylight, about the war. Not the parts that were in the record, the other parts. The nights in the manor when he had lain awake listening to the house move under the weight of what lived in it. The thing he had been made to do, and the thing he had failed to do, and the way both of them had hollowed out a place in him that had never since filled. He told her about his mother's silence at the breakfast table, and his father's hands, once so certain of the world, gone unsteady on the newspaper. He told her about the courtroom, how he had watched a dark-haired woman give her testimony and felt, underneath the terror, a kind of terrible relief that at least someone in the room was telling the truth, even if the truth was about him. She didn't lie to make it worse, he said one night, low, his thumb moving over the back of her hand in the way it had come to move whenever they sat like this. His ritual now, hers, the small, ceaseless motion that had replaced the turning of the ring. She could have. God knows others did. She just said what happened. Exactly what happened. No more. I've thought about that more than I've thought about almost anything. A pause. The fire settled. It's a strange thing, to be saved a little by the person who has the most reason to bury you. Hermione sat with her hand in his, and her face composed by main force, and thought, I didn't do it to save you. I did it because it was true. I didn't even know you noticed. She had never known he noticed. That was the discovery that undid her night after night. Not that he had suffered, which she could have guessed, but that he had been watching her through all of it, that a version of her had lived in him for 10 years, assembled from courtroom glimpses and corridor silences, and the 2 syllables of her name he could never make himself finish, and that this interior Hermione had become, somewhere in the long solitude of his life, the one person he had decided he could tell the truth to, precisely because she was the one person he was certain he would never get the chance. And now, here she was, the actual woman, holding his actual hand, receiving the truth he had built his whole secret self around never being able to give her, and letting him believe he was giving it to a ghost. The guilt had a taste now. It sat at the back of her throat, coppery, constant, and it grew sharper with every honest thing he handed her, because the transaction had dissolved. There was no longer any pretense that this was commerce, that she was a companion, and he a client, and the hour a thing that money had bought. He no longer asked her what he had come to want. He came, and he sat, and he took her hand, and he talked into the green dark until the fire burned low, and sometimes he did not talk at all. Sometimes they only sat, her hand in his, the silence drawn taut and humming between them. And those nights were worse than the talking ones, because in the silence there was nothing to do but feel the thing that was growing between them, and know that it was real on both sides and built on a lie on one. He was falling. She could see it. A man does not hold a phantom's hand like that, does not move his thumb over her knuckles like a prayer he cannot stop saying, does not look at her across a low table with his whole tired, guarded face laid open, unless something in him has decided, against all sense, to love the thing he is looking at. And the thing he was looking at was her. That should have been the sweetest fact in the world. Instead, it was the sharpest, because he did not know it. He believed he was falling for a counterfeit, a safe and vanishing copy, a Hermione he could love precisely because she was not the real one, and therefore could never truly know him, never truly judge him, never truly leave. He had chosen the phantom over the woman on purpose. He had reached for the mask because the face terrified him. And she who was the face, she who was the woman, she who was the one thing he had ruled out as impossible, sat inside the mask he'd ordered and let him love her under the one name that made his love feel safe to him. And every night she went home more certain that she was committing the most intimate cruelty of her life. "You've gone quiet," he said. It was late. The fire had sunk to embers, throwing more shadow than light now, so that he was mostly a dark shape, and the pale gleam of his face and the warmth of his hands around hers. She had not spoken in a long while. She had been sitting with her own thoughts, turning like the ring he no longer turned, and the silence had grown until he'd noticed it. And now he was leaning slightly toward her through the red dark, trying to read a face he thought he understood and did not understand at all. "I was thinking," she said carefully, "about what you'd do if she knew." She should not have said it. She knew it the moment it left her. It was too near the edge, too close to the truth she was drowning in. But the words came anyway, because she could not, some nights, keep herself entirely down. If, who knew? But he knew. She saw him understand. His hands tightened very slightly around hers. The real one. Her voice was low and even and cost her everything. The real Hermione Granger. If she knew you came here, if she knew what you said, if she knew that a version of her that you'd made a version of her to say these things to. She made herself hold his gaze in the dark. What would you do if the real one found out? He was silent for a long moment. The embers ticked. Somewhere far off in the house, a door closed. "I've thought about it," he said finally, and his voice had gone rough and very quiet. "It's the thing I'm most afraid of, more than anything the daylight could do to me." His thumb had gone still on her hand. "Because it isn't only that she'd know I wanted her. I could survive that, maybe. It's that she'd know I couldn't want her honestly, that I had to build a copy to do it, that I looked at the real woman and decided she was too far above the wreck of me to reach for, so I paid to have a safe one made instead. A breath, unsteady. She'd know I was a coward. That's the part I couldn't bear. Not that I love her. That I only had the courage to love a ghost of her. I love her." He had said it. Not want, not ache for, love, plain and quiet and terrible in the dark, set to a phantom about the woman whose warm hand he was holding. And Hermione felt the word go through her and out the other side and leave a hole she did not know how to close. "You're not a coward," she said, and her voice broke on it, cracked clean down the middle, the low steadiness she had held for 4 visits shattering all at once. And it did not sound like ivory. It did not sound like any phantom. It sounded like a woman with a real and breaking heart, and she heard herself do it and could not stop it. And across the low table in the red dark, she saw Draco Malfoy go very still. "Say that again," he said slowly. "You're not a coward." She was gripping his hands now, both of hers around both of his, and the tears had come and she let them, because there was no version of this she could still perform her way out of. "You're the bravest person You have no idea what you are. You have no idea what she would... Stop." He was leaning toward her, close now, closer than he had ever come, his face swimming up out of the dark, and there was something in it that had not been there before. Not wonder, not grief, but a dawning, dreadful attention, the look of a man who has heard a note that does not belong in a piece of music he knows by heart. "Your voice, just now, it changed." His hands turned in hers, gripping back. "That wasn't... The potion doesn't do that. The catch in it, His breath had gone shallow. "Phantoms don't cry. They told me. Whatever it builds, it doesn't have anything underneath to cry from." She could not answer. She sat frozen with his hands crushing hers, and the tears wet on her own real face, and her own real voice hanging shattered in the air between them. And she watched the impossible suspicion break across his features in the red light of the dying fire, watched him lean in until she could feel the warmth of him, watched his free hand rise, trembling toward her wet cheek, as though to test whether the tears on it were real. And she did not pull away, and she did not confess. And she sat suspended in the last unbearable second before his fingers reached her skin, unable to move, unable to breathe, waiting for the touch that would tell him everything. His fingers reached her cheek and stopped. They did not touch the tears. They hovered a hair's breadth from her skin, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off them, and there they hung, trembling, while his eyes searched her face in the red dark with an intensity that stripped her bare. And then, slowly, deliberately, as though pulling back from an edge he had chosen not to go over, he lowered the hand. He did not touch the tears. He did not test whether they were real. He did not want to know. She understood it in the instant he withdrew, and the understanding was almost worse than being caught would have been. He had come to the very lip of the truth, had felt the ground of his own certainty shift beneath him. Phantoms don't cry. And he had chosen, with a deliberate and terrible act of will, to step back from it. Because to reach out and confirm that the tears were real was to unmake the only safe thing he had. It was to risk discovering that the woman across the table was not a phantom at all. And a man who has built his whole guarded heart around loving something safe does not go looking for proof that it was never safe to begin with. So he chose not to know. He chose the mask over the face, one more time, more knowingly than before. And it broke her, that choice, because she saw in it the exact shape of everything he had told her. I only had the courage to love a ghost of her. Here was the courage failing again, in real time, in the space of a single withdrawn hand. He would rather love a lie than survive the truth. "Forgive me," he said, low and unsteady, drawing back into his chair, putting the low table between them once more. "I don't know what It's late. I'm seeing things that aren't there." A rough breath. He would not look at her now. You've done enough. More than enough. Let me go." He rose. She sat frozen, her tears drying on her face, and watched him cross the worn carpet to the door with the careful, upright, half-risen walk she had come to know so well. The walk of a man always half out of the room he stood in. His hand found the latch. And there, at the threshold, with his back to her, with the dark of the corridor waiting to take him, he stopped. "I won't come back," Draco said. The words fell into the room like the ring falling to the table that first night, loud in the hush. What? It left her before she could shape it into anything. "I can't." He did not turn around. His hand was flat against the door, the silver ring gleaming faintly. "You, whatever you are, whatever they made you, you're too..." His voice went thin. "I've been coming here to feel a thing I have no right to feel, and telling myself it costs nothing because you're not real. And tonight, you..." He stopped. His shoulders had gone rigid. It stopped costing nothing. That's the truth of it. It started costing everything, and I didn't notice the change until just now, and now that I've noticed, I can't. I can't keep coming here to be in love with a ghost. It's the loneliest thing a man can do. And I've done a great many lonely things. A breath, drawn like it hurt. "Goodbye." The latch bit. The door opened on the dark. Draco. She had not meant to say it. His name, his given name, the real one, in her real voice, cracked and low and unmistakably hers, went out across the room and struck him between the shoulder blades. And she saw it land, saw every muscle in him seize, saw the hand on the door go white at the knuckle. Because she had never called him that. Not once in 4 visits. Ivory called men nothing at all, or called them sir, or called them whatever soft thing the house had trained into her. And no phantom of Hermione Granger, built to be safe, built to be a comfort, would have said his name like that, like a wound, like a plea, like a woman watching the one thing she wanted walk out a door she herself had built. He turned around, slowly, the dark of the corridor at his back. His face was white in the ember light, and it was not undone now, not soft, not open. It had gone hard and still and very carefully blank, the way a face goes blank when the mind behind it is moving very fast and very far, assembling a thing it does not want to assemble. His grey eyes came to hers and held them, and this time they did not slide off, did not seek the phantom, did not accept the mask. They looked into her, past the face he had ordered, past the hair and the mouth, into the eyes the potion could never change. The eyes he had said were the thing he wanted most, the eyes they had gotten exactly right. And she watched the last impossible certainty arrive in him, and there was nowhere left for either of them to hide. "Say it again," he said. His voice had gone deadly quiet. She could not. "Say my name again." He took a step back into the room. The door swung shut behind him on its silence, sealing them in. "The potion doesn't do names like that. It doesn't do. It builds a woman who wants what the client wants, who says what soothes. It doesn't build one who says a man's name like she's watching him drown." Another step. His hands had begun to shake, and he did not still them now. "I've spent 4 nights telling myself the warmth was a trick of the brew, the tears, the catch in your voice. I told myself, because the alternative was—" He stopped a few feet from her, looking down at her where she sat frozen in the dying light, and his whole tired face had cracked open at last, not with wonder now, but with something closer to terror. "Look at me. Look at me and tell me you're a phantom. Tell me there's no one real behind those eyes. Tell me, and I'll believe you. God help me, because I want to believe you more than I've ever wanted anything. Tell me it isn't you." And Hermione Granger, sitting in the ruins of 4 weeks of lies, in her own true skin that had never worn any disguise, with her own true tears drying on her own true face, looked up at the man she had gone to destroy and could not tell him it wasn't her. She said nothing. That was the whole of it. She simply looked at him in her own real silence and let him see. The silence was the confession. It went into him and she watched it go, watched the last defense fall, watched the impossible thing become simply the true thing, watched him understand that the woman he had come here for 4 weeks to love in the safety of her supposed unreality was the woman herself, entire, unaltered, the actual Hermione Granger, who had been sitting across this table, hearing every naked word he had believed himself to be saying into a void. He made a sound, low, wordless, as though something had been struck out of him. "How long?" It was barely a voice. "How long have you... Was it the first night? Was it you, the first night, when you told me what I'd come to want?" His face had gone grey. "When I asked for... When I said I wanted you to come to me as Hermione Granger, were you already... Was I asking you to pretend to be yourself?" She could not lie to him anymore. She had spent every lie she had. "Yes," she said. Her voice was a wreck. "There was never a potion, not after the first night. I came as myself. It's been me. All of it. Every night. Me." The silence that followed was the longest of her life. He did not shout. She had braced for shouting. The shouting would have been mercy. Instead, he stood very still in the ember light and looked at her, and she watched the arithmetic happen behind his eyes. watched him rewind through 4 weeks of the most defenseless truth he had ever told, and reassign each word, each confession, each wound laid bare. From the safe ghost he had believed was receiving them to the actual living woman who had been sitting there the whole time, taking them, keeping them, knowing. Watched him understand that there was no confession he could take back, that she had it all, that he had handed her, willingly, believing her a phantom, the entire undefended interior of himself, and that she was real, and had been real, and would carry every word of it out into the daylight, where it could cost him everything. "You came to spy on me," he said, flat, certain, the last piece dropping into place. "That's what this is. That's what you are. The ministry, the money. You came to..." His voice failed. His hand had risen to his own mouth, pressing there, as though to hold something in. "I told you about the war. I told you about my mother. I told you..." The hand dropped. When he spoke again, it was almost gentle, and the gentleness was the most terrible thing she had ever heard. "I told a phantom I loved her, and the phantom was you, and you let me." He took a step back from her, and another, away now toward the door, not the half-risen walk of the man always leaving, but a real retreat, a flinch made whole, a man pulling his hand back from a fire that had finally, at long last, burned him. "Draco!" She was on her feet. "Draco, please, let me..." "Don't!" He had the door open. The dark of the corridor stood behind him, and he was already half into it, already going, his white face turned back toward her for one last moment, wearing an expression she knew she would see behind her eyes for the rest of her life. Betrayal and love and humiliation all at once, indistinguishable, fused. "Don't say my name. You don't get to say it. Not now. Not ever again." And he was gone into the dark, and the door swung shut on its silence behind him, and Hermione stood alone in the ember light of the room where she had unmade him, with her hand still outstretched toward the space where he had been, and the last warmth of the fire dying at her back, and nothing at all left to hold. The house would not tell her where he had gone. She went back the next night, and the night after, and Marguerite met her at the hidden door each time, with a face gone cool and closed, and each time said the same thing in the same flat register. "He hasn't come. He won't. You've frightened off my best custom, and you'll not do it a third time." And on the third night, the door in the wall did not open at all, and Hermione stood in the fold of London that the maps refused to hold until the cold drove her home, and understood that this door too had shut behind him. She stopped going to the ministry. Not all at once. For a week she went through the motions, sat at her desk, opened the file, moved the parchment from one side of the blotter to the other and back, but the words on it had gone to ash in her hands. Continued surveillance advised. She had advised it. She had lied and lied and lied to keep him safe, and the lie had done its work. The case against Draco Malfoy was thin, going thinner, sustained now only by her own false promise that there was more to find. There was more to find. She had found all of it, and every scrap of it was a wound, not a crime, and she had known that since the second night, and she had gone on pretending otherwise because the pretending was the only thing that kept her walking back to him. She could not keep it up. That was the thing she understood, sitting at her desk with the ash of the file in her hands. The whole edifice of her deception had been built to serve a single end, to be near him. And now that the end was gone, the deception had nothing to stand on, and it came down. So she wrote the true report at last. She wrote it in one sitting, in her own flat, at her own table, in the grey small hours, and she did not spare herself. She wrote that she had been compromised in the first week and had concealed it. She wrote that the disclosures she had obtained were personal, not criminal, and that she had suppressed them, not to protect the investigation, but to protect the subject. She wrote that the money the ministry had chased through the old families had, on examination of everything she'd learned, nothing to do with Draco Malfoy at all, that he came to the house not to move galleons in the dark, but to be, for 1 hour a week, in the presence of a woman he believed he was forbidden to want, and that this was the whole of his secret, and that it was no business of the laws. She wrote that she had deceived him in a manner she now understood to be unconscionable. She signed it in her own true name, and the ink went down straight this time, and in the morning she carried it in and laid it on the desk of the man she answered to, and stood while he read it. They did not sack her. She had almost wished they would. Instead, there was an inquiry and a censure, and a long grey season of closed rooms and careful questions, at the end of which the case against the old families collapsed for want of the evidence it had never had. And Draco Malfoy's name was struck from every ledger it had appeared on, cleared not by his innocence, though he was innocent, but by the confession of the woman who had been sent to hang him. She had gone in to indict him, and had ended by indicting only herself, and she found she did not mind. It was the one true thing she had done in the whole miserable affair, and she held on to it the way a drowning woman holds a spar. He would know. That was the one comfort she allowed herself in the grey weeks after. Whatever else the collapse of the case did, it would reach him. The news that the investigation had ended, that his name was clear, that the woman who had deceived him had gone before the ministry and taken the whole weight of it onto her own back, rather than let a single word of what he'd told her be used against him. He would know she had protected him, even in the confessing. It would not undo what she had done, but he would know. Autumn came in cold and wet. The city ran with rain, the gutters loud with it, the street lamps smeared to long gold ribbons on the wet black roads. She walked a great deal, in the rain, in the evenings, because the flat had become unbearable. Every corner of it held the memory of a decision made in the dark. The vial poured down the drain, the sleepless nights, the promise she had made herself and kept, and should never have kept. She walked, and she did not go near the fold of London that the maps refused to hold. And she told herself that this was the shape of the rest of it, that she had been given a thing she had no right to, and had ruined it in the taking, and that ruin was the just and final outcome, and that a wiser woman would learn to live inside it. She did not believe herself. She had never once, in the whole affair, managed to believe herself, because she loved him. That was the plain, unbearable fact at the bottom of all of it. The thing the guilt had been hiding, the thing she had refused to look at straight, while there was still any hope of not having to feel it. She had gone into that green-lit room to take his secrets, and had come out having lost her own. And the secret she had lost was this, that somewhere between the courtroom testimony and the 4 nights of holding his hand in the dark, she had fallen in love with Draco Malfoy, entirely, ruinously. With the whole of her heart, she had always believed she kept better guarded than that. She had loved him before she'd let herself know it. She had loved him when she poured the potion down the drain. She had loved him every night she'd sat across the low table and let him pour himself into a phantom. And the reason she had let him, the true reason, under all the reasons about missions and evidence and impossible arithmetic, was that it had been the only way she could have him at all. And she had lost him by having him. That was the sentence she had written for herself, and she walked the rain-loud streets in the cold and served it. It was on such an evening, late October, the rain coming down in cold silver sheets, the lamps smeared to gold, that she came around the corner of her own street and found a figure standing under the lamp outside her door. She stopped. He was in black, as he always was, the rain darkening it darker, his pale hair gone flat and wet against his skull. He was not sheltering from the rain. He stood in the full pour of it, hands at his sides, as though he had been standing there long enough to stop noticing that he was soaked through. And he was looking at her door, at the number of it, at the dark windows above, with the still, fixed attention of a man who has walked to a place he told himself he would never walk to, and now cannot remember how he means to knock. She could not move. The rain ran cold down the back of her neck. He turned his head, then, as though he had felt her stop, and across 20 feet of streaming lamplight and falling water, Draco Malfoy's grey eyes found hers, and neither of them moved, and the rain came down between them in its long silver ribbons, and the whole of the ruined thing hung in the air, unspoken, waiting. "They told me it was over," he said. His voice barely carried over the hiss of the rain. "The case. My name struck out. They told me that someone had gone before the ministry and taken the whole of it onto themselves, refused to let a word of what they'd learned be used." He did not come closer. His hands stayed at his sides. "I wanted to know who'd do that. Take a censure, an inquiry, put their own name in the fire to keep a Malfoy's clean." A breath, ragged in the wet dark. "I already knew who. I just wanted to hear you say it. Draco, you said my name." His voice cracked on it. "You're not allowed. I told you you weren't allowed." "I know." She was crying now, or it was the rain, or both, and she could not tell and did not care. "I know I'm not. I'm sorry. I'm so... There's no... I don't have a word big enough for how sorry I am. I deceived you in the worst way a person can be deceived. I let you say things to me you thought no one real would hear. I took from you when I'd sworn I'd protect you, and I know there's nothing I can... Why did you do it?" He took a step toward her, into the rain, out of the lamp's gold, and into the dark between the lights. "Not the mission. I understand the mission. Why did you keep coming? After the first night, after you had what they sent you for. You didn't need to come back. You poured the potion out. Marguerite told me, in the end, she told me everything. You came as yourself. You chose to come as yourself. Why?" He was closer now, close enough that she could see the rain running down his white face, close enough that she could see that his hands, at his sides, had curled into fists to keep themselves from shaking, and were shaking anyway. Tell me why a woman does that. Tell me why she walks into that room, night after night, in her own skin, and holds a man's hand in the dark, and lets him fall in love with her, and falls... He stopped. His breath tore. Tell me it wasn't only the mission. I have to hear you say it wasn't only the mission. I've carried it for a month, not knowing, and I can't. I've come here in the rain like a fool, because I cannot go one more night, not knowing whether any single moment of it was real. And Hermione stood in the streaming dark a foot from him, with the rain coming down cold and silver all around them, and the gold of the lamp behind him, and her whole heart broken open in her chest. And she reached up through the falling water and laid her wet hand against his wet cheek, the touch she had not been able to give him across the low table, the touch he had pulled his own hand back from that last terrible night. And she felt him go utterly still beneath it, felt the shudder that went through him, felt him lean, helpless, into her palm the way he had leaned into it that first night when he'd said, "You're warm." And she opened her mouth to give him the truth she had spent a whole ruined autumn keeping, the truth that had been true since before she knew it. And the rain roared down around them, and neither of them moved to leave it. None of it was the mission, she said. The rain took the words, and she said them louder, because he had to hear them, because a month of not knowing had brought him standing in a cold October downpour outside her door, and she would not let a single syllable of the truth be lost to the weather. Do you hear me? None of it. Not after the first hour. The first hour was the mission. I'll not lie to you. Not now. Not ever again. The first hour I sat in that room, I was doing my job. I was reading you like a hostile witness. I was going to take whatever you gave me and walk out and never think of you again. Her hand was still against his cheek, and she felt him flinch at that, and she held it there, made him feel her hold it there. And then you asked me to come to you as myself, and I went home, and I couldn't... Draco, I couldn't sleep for 3 nights, because a man had looked at a room full of every possible face the world could give him and asked for mine. Mine, the one face that had no business being wanted. And I told myself it was the case. I told myself I was going back for the case. I poured out the potion and told myself it was tradecraft to come as myself, and it was all... Her voice broke. It was all lies I told to a mirror, so I wouldn't have to say the true thing even to myself. What true thing? His voice was almost nothing. His cheek pressed into her palm. The rain ran down both their faces. That I wanted to be wanted by you. It came out of her raw, unguarded, stripped of every defense she had ever built. That I'd spent 10 years being useful and clever and right, being the woman who tells the truth in courtrooms, being everyone's good sense and no one's Draco. And you looked at me across a table you thought had a phantom sitting at it, and you told me things you'd never told a living soul, and you held my hand like it was the only warm thing left in the world, and you saw me, not the brain, not the record, me. You'd built a whole secret version of me in your head for 10 years, and it turned out the version you'd built was... It was truer than the one everyone else looked at. You knew about the testimony. You knew I hadn't lied to make it worse. You'd been watching me all that time, and I never knew. And when I finally sat in that room and heard you... She was crying openly now, the rain no cover for it anymore. I fell in love with you. That's the true thing. I fell in love with you in that green room in the dark, and I kept coming back because it was the only way I could have you, and I hated myself every single night, and I came back anyway because I would rather have had you as a lie than not have had you at all. That's how far gone I was. That's what I did to you, because I couldn't stop. He had gone very still under her hand. The rain hissed on the pavement, ran in the gutters, smeared the lamps to long gold ribbons down the wet black street, and for a long moment he did not speak at all, and she stood with her heart laid open in the cold and waited for him to turn and go, because she had earned his going, because a woman who deceives a man into love has no right to keep him when the deception breaks. "Do you know what I did?" Draco said, "when they told me the case was over?" She shook her head, her hand still against his face. I laughed. His mouth twisted, and it was not a smile. It was the memory of where a smile might have gone. I stood in my own hall, and I laughed until I couldn't breathe, and my mother came out and thought I'd lost my mind, because they'd told me the woman who deceived me had gone before the ministry and burned her own name to keep mine out of the fire. And I thought, of course she did. Of course, because that's who she is. That's who she was in the courtroom. She'll tell the truth, even when the truth costs her everything, even when the person it saves is a man who has no claim on being saved. His hand rose, slowly, out of the wet dark, and closed over hers where it lay against his cheek, not to pull it away this time, but to hold it there, to press it harder to his skin. I hated you for a month. I want you to understand that. I hated you the way you hate a door you've walked into in the dark, because you'd made me love a ghost, and the ghost had a spy's face, and I couldn't. Every good thing I'd felt in that room turned to poison the moment I understood you were real. Every word I'd said, I couldn't take one of them back. "I know," she whispered. "I know. I'm so—" "Let me finish." His hand tightened over hers. "I hated you for a month. And in that whole month, do you know what I couldn't do? I couldn't stop being glad it was you. That's the thing that nearly killed me, Granger. That's the thing I came here in the rain to say, because I couldn't carry it one more night. I was destroyed that you were real, and underneath the destruction, in the place I couldn't reach to lie to, I was. God help me, I was glad, because it meant that when I said I loved her, I'd said it to her, to the real one, the impossible one, the one I'd ruled out because a man like me doesn't get to reach that high. I spent 4 nights loving a woman I thought was safe because she wasn't real, and it turned out she was real the whole time, and that meant—" His voice cracked clean through. "It meant it counted. It meant I'd actually loved you, not a ghost. You. And I couldn't decide whether that was the cruelest thing you'd done to me, or the only true thing that had ever happened in my life. And I've been standing outside your door for 2 hours in the rain trying to decide, and I still don't know. And I'm too tired to keep not knowing." The rain came down between them and around them, and neither of them moved. "You're the bravest coward I've ever met," she said, half a sob, half a laugh, the words she'd tried to say to him in the green dark and never finished. "You said you only had the courage to love a ghost of me, and then you stood in a courtroom's worth of humiliation, knowing everything I'd done, and you walked across a whole broken city in the rain to stand outside my door. That's not a coward, Draco. A coward stays home. A coward lets the door stay shut. Her thumb moved over his cheekbone, slow, the way his thumb had moved over her knuckles 100 times in the dark, and she felt the shudder it sent through him. You came for the real one. In the end, you came for me. I don't know how to do this, he said, and it was the same thing he'd said the first night she came to him as herself. I don't know how to do this, and it wrecked her to hear it again, here, in the rain, with no phantom between them, and no potion, and no lie left to hide behind. There's no mask now. There's no room. There's no arrangement that ends at dawn. It's you, and it's me, and it's the whole daylight. And I've never once in my life had a thing I wanted without a way to make it safe first. And there's no way to make this safe, is there? No, she said. There isn't. That's the whole point of it. That's what makes it real. He looked at her for a long, long moment in the streaming dark. The rain ran down his face, off his jaw, and his grey eyes moved over her true face, the face he'd wanted most, the eyes the potion could never have changed because there had never been a potion. And she watched the last of the hatred and the last of the fear and the last of the month of not knowing move through him and out of him and away, carried off in the rain and the gold-smeared dark, until there was nothing left in his face but the thing he had never once let himself show her across the low table. Not the wonder, not the grief, but a naked, undefended, terrified hope. Then I don't want it safe, Draco Malfoy said. I've had a whole life of safe. It's the loneliest thing there is. His free hand rose to her face, and this time it did not stop a hair's breadth away. This time it did not withdraw. This time it came to rest against her wet cheek, warm in all the cold, his palm cupping the line of her jaw the way she had cupped his, so that they stood in the pouring dark, each holding the other's face, the rain roaring down around them and the lamplight gold behind them. I want it real. I want it dangerous. I want it to cost me everything. I want... His breath caught. His forehead came down to rest against hers, wet skin against wet skin, his eyes falling closed, so close now that she could feel the shape of the words before he said them. I want you, the real one, the impossible one, the one who tells the truth even when it burns her own name down. God, Granger, I have wanted you for 10 years, and I am so tired of wanting you from across a room. And Hermione Granger closed the last inch of streaming dark between them and kissed him. He made a sound against her mouth, low, broken, the sound of a thing held back for 10 years finally letting go. And then his arms came around her and pulled her in, and the careful, upright, half-risen distance he had kept his whole life collapsed all at once. And there was no table between them anymore, and no potion, and no phantom, and no lie, only the rain and the cold and the sudden furnace warmth of him. And she kissed him, and he kissed her back, like a man who had been drowning for a decade and had just been dragged into air. His hands were in her wet hair, on her jaw, at the small of her back, everywhere and disbelieving, as though he could not persuade himself she would not dissolve, as though some part of him was still braced for her to turn out to be the ghost after all, to come apart into nothing between his fingers the way the potion's phantom would have done at dawn. And she felt that fear in the way he held her, felt him holding on too hard, and she answered it the only way there was. She kissed him deeper, gripped the sodden black of his collar in both her fists, pressed the whole warm living length of herself against him so there could be no mistaking her for anything unreal. "I'm here," the kiss said, past all the words they'd wrecked themselves on. "I'm here, and I'm warm, and I'm not going to vanish. I'm the real one. I've always been the real one. Feel me." He tore his mouth from hers, only to press his forehead to hers again, both of them breathing hard in the pouring dark, his hands framing her face, and he was shaking, and she was shaking, and the rain came down, and neither of them cared. "You're warm," he said, wrecked, wondering, and it was the thing he'd said the very first night, when he thought a potion had built her, and now it meant the whole opposite thing. Now it meant you're real. You're real. You were always real. And she laughed, or sobbed, the two gone indistinguishable, and pulled him down and kissed him again for saying it. "Come inside," she managed against his lips. "You're soaked through. You've been standing in the rain for 2 hours like a fool." "I'd stand in it for 2 more. "I know you would. That's why I love you. Now come inside." She felt him go still at the words. "That's why I love you," said plainly in the open, in the daylight that was night, with no green firelight to soften it, and no arrangement to contain it. Felt him hear it as the real thing said by the real woman, the thing he had only ever been able to say to a ghost. And she watched it land in him and take root. And she took his cold, wet hand in hers and drew him up the step and through her own door, out of the rain at last. The flat was dark, and she did not light it fully, only a low lamp, gold and small, throwing a warmth that was nothing like the green cold of the house, a warmth that belonged to her, to her real life, to the daylight world she had spent a month believing she'd never get to bring him into. He stood dripping in the middle of her sitting room and looked at it all with a kind of stunned reverence. Her books, her cluttered table, the ordinary evidence of an ordinary life lived by the real woman he had wanted from across a decade. And she understood that he had never once imagined this. He had imagined the room in the house. He had imagined the phantom, safe and vanishing. He had never let himself imagine this, the real thing, the true woman standing in her own true home, holding out a towel to him with rain in her hair and love plain on her unguarded face, because to imagine it had been to want a thing he was certain he could not have. "Here," she said, and pressed the towel into his hands, and he took it and did not use it, only stood holding it and looking at her. "I keep waiting," he said quietly, "for it to end, for the hour to be up, for you to—" That's how it always was. The door and the dark, and then it was over, and I went back out into a life where you didn't, where there was no version of you that was mine. His grey eyes moved over her face in the gold lamplight. "I don't know how to be somewhere the hour doesn't end." "Then I'll teach you," she said. "We'll both learn. Neither of us knows how to do this, remember? You said it yourself. First night, and again in the rain. I don't know how to do this." She stepped close to him, took the unused towel from his hands, and began, slowly, to dry the rain from his hair, from his face, her fingers moving over the sharp, cold planes of him with a tenderness she had never before been permitted to give. The tenderness she'd had to keep locked behind Ivory's professional distance, behind the phantom's borrowed calm, all the tenderness of a whole ruined autumn given now, at last, to the real man standing in her real room. So, we'll not know how together. That's allowed. That's the whole of it, I think. You don't do the thing that's safe. You do the thing that's true. And you do it with someone who's doing it too. And you're neither of you sure of the ground. And that's Draco. That's living. That's the thing you said you'd never had. Safe is the lonely thing. You told me that in the dark, and you were right. His hands came up and closed over hers, where they held the towel to his face, stilling them, and he turned his cheek into her palm, eyes falling shut, and breathed. "Say it again," he said. "The thing you said outside, in the rain." His voice had gone low and unsteady. "I've heard you say a great many true things tonight. I want that one again. I want to be sure I didn't build it out of wishing, the way I built the rest of you for 10 years. She set the towel aside. She took his face in both her hands. His real face, no potion between them, no green firelight, only the honest gold of her own lamp. And she made him open his eyes and look at her, and she said it slowly, so there could be no mistaking it for anything unreal. "I love you." The words went into the warm gold quiet of the room and stayed there, solid, true, hers. Not a phantom of you, not a version I built in my head. You, the tired, brave, impossible whole of you, who tells the truth to strangers in the dark because he's forgotten anyone real would want to hear it. I love you, Draco Malfoy, the real one. I've loved you since a green room I had no business being in, and I'll go on loving you in the daylight where it costs us both everything, and I am done. I am so done, wanting you from across a room. He kissed her. Not the desperate, drowning kiss of the rain-soaked street this time, but something slower, deeper, more certain. A kiss with no hour on it, no door waiting to open on the dark, no dawn coming to dissolve it. A kiss that believed, at last, that it would still be there in the morning. His hands came into her hair, and hers fisted in the damp black of his shirt, and the small gold lamp threw its warmth over the two of them. And outside, the rain went on falling on the city, on the gutters and the smeared gold lamps, and the fold of London that the maps refused to hold. But it fell on the far side of a door that was, for the first time in either of their lives, shut against the cold with both of them warm inside it. When they finally drew apart, he pressed his forehead to hers again. His ritual now, hers, the small, ceaseless gesture that had begun in the dark and would go on now in the light. And he laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, a sound she had never once heard him make, and it broke something open in her chest that she hadn't known was still closed. "What?" she said, half laughing herself. "What is it?" "I went to that house," he said, "for years, paid a fortune, told myself it was the closest I'd ever get. A painted meal at the only table left." His thumb moved over her cheekbone. "And it turned out the real thing had been sitting across the table from me the whole time. I'd have paid the fortune 10 times over and never known, if you hadn't—" His voice caught. "If you hadn't been too honest to keep lying to me. You ruined the finest deception I've ever seen because you couldn't bear to let me love a ghost when the real thing was right there." Do you understand what a mad, reckless, good thing that was to do? It cost me my name at the ministry, she said, and smiled, and found she did not mind it, had never once minded it. It was worth every letter. Marry me, he said. She went still. He had not planned it. She could see that, could see the words surprise him as much as they surprised her, could see him hear himself say them and decide in the same instant that he meant them more than he had ever meant anything. He drew back just far enough to look at her, his grey eyes wide and terrified and utterly certain all at once, his hands trembling where they held her face. I don't know how to do this, he said, for the last time, and it was not fear in it now, but wonder. Any of it, the daylight, the staying, I don't know how to be a man who gets the thing he wanted, but I'd rather learn it with you than be safe and lonely for the rest of my life. And I'm done, Granger. I'm so done, wanting you from across a room. So marry me. Be the real one. Be mine in the daylight where it costs us everything. Say yes. And Hermione Granger, who had gone into the dark to steal a man's secrets and had come out having given him her whole unguarded heart, looked up into the real face of the man she loved, in the warm gold light of her own true home, with the rain falling soft and steady on the far side of a door shut fast against the cold. And she did not make him wait, and she did not make it safe, and she did the truest thing she had ever done in her life. She said yes.
Thank you for staying with me until the end. I want to tell you what I was thinking when I wrote this story. I was thinking about one small moment. The moment when Draco says, "You are warm." At first, he says it because he believes she is a potion, a fake, a ghost. But later, he says the same words again, and this time they mean the opposite. This time they mean you're real. The same words, a completely different truth. That is what this story is about for me. We often want love, but we want it to be safe. We want it to be easy. We want a version we can control, a ghost. But a ghost cannot love you back. Real love is not safe. Real love can hurt you. Real love costs everything. Draco spent years hiding in the dark, waiting from far away, and it made him lonely. The lesson is simple. Safe is the lonely thing. If you want something true, you have to step into the light. You have to show your real face, even when it is scary, even when you can lose everything. Hermione was brave, not because she was strong, but because she could not keep lying to a good heart. So here's my one wish for you. Do not love a ghost. Choose the real thing. Choose the daylight. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next story.